Your policy announcement today is related to the climate emergency. You're promising an extra £100 billion to tackle the climate emergency. Tell us what that actually involves and where you're getting the money from.
Well, it's over 5 years, and it's going to be focused in on greening our transport, cleaning our transport systems. It's going to be insulating people's homes, a massive programme to help people save on their energy bills by helping them to consume less energy, and also on renewable power, renewable heating. So it's a economy-wide programme, and some of the money will be from borrowing if it's investing in capital and in buildings, and about 15 billion of it is on revenue spend to help people. For example, with more buses and with more walking, more cycling, with a rail freeze.
I remember speaking to one of your colleagues about some of the details of some of this plan before it's been outlined in more detail today. And in terms of the actual amount of money aimed at, for instance, making people's homes more energy efficient, we are looking at something like sort of 500 quid a home if you're looking at the 26 million households we've got, which doesn't really go very far.
Well, we reckon we can save the average household £500 a year on their heating bill, because if you look at the 10-year programme that we're proposing to insulate and retrofit over 20 million homes, starting with those homes of the most vulnerable and those on lowest incomes to tackle fuel poverty, it can be done over that 10-year programme. It's got to be done really, really quickly. We showed in government that we can get it done. We did 1 million homes, but we need to now step that up and aim for the whole housing stock. That's why it's a significant amount of money. But the great thing about the Democrat proposals is it builds on our success in government. And I was a minister who nearly quadrupled Britain's renewable power. I helped make Britain the world leader in offshore wind. And Liberal Democrats, having got the best record on climate investment of any political party, we know how to do it. And by the way, it's not just through the state sector in the way that Labour Party want to do it, or through ignoring climate change, as seems to be the Conservative policy. Ours will be a partnership where we get lots of private investment backed up by this public investment too.
But I mean, there are, though, nevertheless some concerns about focusing on renewable energies. I've no doubt at all in 50, 100 years' time, there will be reliable renewable energies. At the current time, though, not reliable, and we need to have backup energy sources. And we also know the renewables only account for a percentage of electricity. Electricity is only about a third of our energy needs. You can't use renewables to produce gas, for instance, and gas here, central heating, and a large amount of our manufacturing relying on that. How do you propose to extend renewables to such an extent that they are A, completely reliable, which is what we need for life to function, and B, in terms of actually being able to expand their ability to produce enough energy for us? This is going to be a long-term project, but you're not going to do it in the next 20 years.
It is a long-term project. I don't disagree with that, Julia, actually. But you've got to store and learn how to store the power. And storage technologies have been coming on massively. And let me also point to a programme that I did when I was Secretary of State. I got Statnet from Norway to work with National Grid in the UK to build the longest subsea cable connecting the UK and Norway, the longest subsea cable in the world. And what was that for? It means that if the wind isn't blowing, we'll be able to switch that cable on and use green hydropower from Norway. That's some of the cheapest renewable power in the world. It's in plentiful supply, and thanks to that subsea cable that I helped get built, we will have a sort of hydropower battery in the north of Norway. So these are the ways you manage energy systems in the future.
Well, yeah, but that's electricity. But electricity, I say 20, 30, I think it's actually, I think it's 20 rather than 30% of our energy needs. How are you going to manage the rest of it?
Well, first of all, I was asking your first question about storage, and I've answered that.
Okay.
The second question, which is about, you're quite right, because we've got to decarbonise heating, which is currently done by methane. We've got to decarbonise transport because of all the petrol and diesel. And we have plans for that. But you can only do it, Julia, if you have a lot of renewable electricity, because a lot of the ways we're going to decarbonise transport and heating will depend on the electricity system. We're going to have electric vehicles. We may have some electrification of heating. And so we're going to need to have that renewable power in a large amount, and that will enable us to do what we're talking about.
Can we also talk about one of the big headlines today, which is Labour's policy for free broadband, effectively renationalising large parts of British, or BT as it's known, formerly British Telecom, and offering free broadband to the nation as now a necessity. What are your thoughts on that policy announcement?
I think it's ridiculously expensive and unnecessarily expensive. You could achieve this for far less money through tough regulation. Let me tell you where the Conservatives are going wrong. They're allowing cables, several cables, to be built in richer urban areas, so people got more cables than they need with the roads being dug up. But that means that the companies are not investing in the poorer areas or in the rural areas. What you need is proper tough regulation to say you can only lay that cable in that nice rich area in the urban area, which is serving lots of people, if you also do the less well-off areas and the rural areas. That is a sensible approach, and it doesn't require these ridiculous billions of pounds that Labour is spending everywhere, even when it's not needed.
But it's not just making it available. I think everyone sensible wants broadband to be available. It's vital for business, and it's just, again, a normal part of daily life in the 21st century. However, free broadband. Do you think that broadband should be top of the list of priorities that should be handed out free?
Well, we don't hand out water or gas or electricity or other things free. So it would be the first utility ever to be handed out free. And I think there's a real danger in that, and is that you'd end up with very low quality.
OK, thank you.
We've had too low quality. We want the best for our country.
Today, Nicola Sturgeon, your leader, is going to be making a major announcement. What she's going to be saying?
I'm not sure what the announcement will be later today. No,
that much of a secret?
It's that much of a secret. I mean, the key message for today that I think every candidate in the country will be aware is that we're demanding £175 million in VAT back that Scottish police and fire have paid to the UK government, and that no other police or fire service in the country has had to pay. That's the announcement we're talking about today. But,
that's interesting. Why on earth are they having to pay VAT to the UK government, but other police forces around the country aren't?
Well, you asked the UK government. Originally, they said, well, it's because it's a regional force, not a national force, or some such nonsense. Turned out none of that was true, and they owe us 175 million quid.
OK, absolutely fascinating. Now, there has been a lot of talk in this election about a second referendum. That's demands from the SNP, from the SNP, the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party, but also talk of a second referendum, not just on European membership, but also of a second referendum for the Scottish independence. The SNP have been very clear, saying in return for a promise of a second independence referendum, they'd be willing to support a Labour government, who knows, maybe even a Liberal Democrat government, if they could get the second referendum that they want for independence. Is there not a risk that Nicola Sturgeon, your leader, is encouraging a unionist vote within Scotland by saying, look, the SNP would back a Corbyn government and get that second referendum? Wouldn't that be a message to lots of those people who perhaps might be tempted to vote for various other different parties or to vote for Labour, to not vote Labour if they want to make sure that the union of the United Kingdom continues?
No, I don't think so. I mean, clearly there are lots of moving parts in this election, but the SNP's position is very clear, as you've described. We don't like Brexit. Lots of people don't like Brexit. The circumstances have changed. We want to see a second EU referendum. But of course, because of the way Scotland's been treated, even the compromise position we proposed, ignored, discounted at day one, Scotland has to have the opportunity to carve a different route, a different path, a better route, if we wish to do so. And so self-evidently there has to be a second independence referendum. That leads us to who we do a deal with, if possible, if a deal is doable at all. And the SNP have said for decades we couldn't possibly support the Tories, but if Jeremy Corbyn wants to be in power, if the SNP hold the balance of power, if he picks the phone up and says, yes, of course, I will respect the will of the Scottish people. I'll respect Scottish democracy. I'll respect the mandate to have another independence referendum. Then, of course, there's something to talk about.
Even though an awful lot of Labour candidates, one of the papers is reporting today, say they don't think that Jeremy Corbyn is fit for public office. I mean, 80% of his MPs in the last 2 years have voted no confidence in him. We've seen former Labour MPs, even former ministers like Ian Austin, saying that Labour voters should vote for Boris Johnson instead. Even though there is quite a lot of concern, even within Labour ranks, about Jeremy Corbyn's fitness for office, you and the SNP be quite happy to put him in power to shore up his government, not a formal coalition maybe, but to shore him up in a minority government, as long as you can get independence. Is that the only thing you're going to consider?
No, I think what I would say to you in response to that is, Jeremy Corbyn's not my favourite person either, but we need to be realistic. He was elected leader of the Labour Party. It is possible, if he does well enough, that he'll be in a position to become Prime Minister. If that is the reality of the situation, then SNP MPs, and I hope there are lots of us again returned, holding the balance of power, need to say, right, can we work with Boris Johnson? Highly unlikely, to the point of frankly impossible. Or can we do business with a Corbyn-led Labour administration? Let's see what we can talk about at that point. But of course, as the First Minister has already said, if Jeremy Corbyn isn't prepared to respect Scottish democracy and the mandate we have for a second independence referendum, then it's hard to see what we would be talking about.
So let's turn our attention now to an announcement from the Conservative Party. Robert Jenrick is the Housing, Communities and Local Government Secretary, and he joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Now, an announcement from you. We'll get on to some of those other topics in just a moment, including accusations from Nigel Farage about what's happening with Brexit candidates. But first up, let's talk about what your party is announcing today. And Boris Johnson is going to announce what is called an ambitious package backed by hundreds of millions of pounds of investment to support towns and communities across Britain, particularly those who have been left behind. What does it actually involve?
Well, look, Boris Johnson as Prime Minister has made it central to the mission of this government, and we hope the next one, to level up all parts of the country and share prosperity and opportunity, and in particular to focus on towns where many people feel that successive governments have underinvested them, not listened to them. We want to invest in them like no government before. We've already done that through our £3.6 billion Towns Fund. And today we're going further with two new measures. Firstly, offering a 50% reduction in business rates for smaller retailers, the people who run your local cafes and restaurants and hairdressers and independent shops, giving them that major tax cut so they can continue with their businesses as consumer habits change and the high street comes under pressure. And secondly, making our towns better connected so people can get to the opportunity areas of the big cities for work, for culture, for leisure, by reopening some of those lines that Dr. Beeching in Labour's Harold Wilson era closed, made a grave error back then. We're going to reopen them with a £500 million fund to get those lines going again, help people to lead better connected lives, make our towns thrive again.
But what's taken so long? I mean, 9 years the Tories have been in power. We know that small businesses and on the high streets, they have been crying out for a cut in their business rates for all of that time, saying how they're being, facing this competition from the internet, and that is absolutely killing the high street. Why has it taken 9 years to offer that?
It hasn't, Julia. We've done a number of things over the years, offering business rates relief progressively throughout that period. For the budget last year, the then Chancellor offered a 1/3 reduction in business rates to the same group of smaller retailers to give them that space to run their businesses. And we're saying that because that was so successful, so popular with those hardworking entrepreneurs, we want to go further and increase that 1/3 to 50%. The 1/3 was worth £8,000 a year to your average small retailer with a rateable value below £51,000. This is an extra £1,400 tax cut to those people. And I think that's the right thing to do because, these entrepreneurs really are the backbone of our communities. And although we're all shopping more online and doing that, it's very convenient for all of us, most of us still want to be able to walk onto a high street and see somewhere that feels thriving, is somewhere we can spend leisure time, meet our neighbours, and is somewhere that brings people together as a hub for our communities.
OK, now there are many people, many business owners who welcome this announcement, but you're up against some rather bigger splashing of the cash from the Labour Party today in terms of their promise to effectively renationalise British BT, formerly British Telecom, particularly the Openreach, and move towards having free broadband for the entire nation, every business, every family by 2030. £20 billion plus a price tag has been attached to that. Difficult to compete when you're talking about cutting business rates by a bit with basically the promise of free broadband to the nation.
Well, look, I think this is another ill-thought-out policy from Labour, extremely expensive, extremely wasteful of hard-working people's money. There's nothing free in life. This just means your broadband's going to be paid out of your taxes. I don't think that's what most people want. We're promising to spend £5 billion, and with that investment, to get gigabit broadband to every home and premise across the country by 2025. Nationalising BT is going to waste years, it's going to cost billions of pounds, and it isn't going to work. Most people's complaint about the broadband system in this country is that it's not competitive enough. People write to me when I was an MP saying that they weren't getting a good service. They want a more competitive market. This means that if your broadband goes down, you're going to have to phone Jeremy Corbyn or Diane Abbott and ask them to fix it. Who really thinks that's going to lead to a better broadband system in this country? And all the independent surveys show that the private sector can deliver 80% of the full fibre coverage in this country. Public money is needed to get to the 20% less commercially viable, harder to reach areas. That's what we're doing. Labour instead are going to waste tens of billions, which could be spent on other things like the NHS, like schools, like getting 20,000 extra police officers onto the streets, or frankly, just allowing you to keep more money in your pocket when you're working hard every week.
And yet polling shows again and again, and it did in the 2017 general election, it does now, that renationalisation of the utilities, of the railways and maybe including BT, we haven't seen any polling on it yet because it's a brand new policy today, is actually very popular, not just with Labour voters, but across the board, and has more than 50% support. Is that a concern for you?
Well, look, I don't think that will be the case with this policy. Of course, giving things for free to people might be superficially popular, but if it leads to a much worse quality service, it isn't going to be. If you're somebody in rural Lincolnshire waiting for full fibre broadband to arrive, and as a result of the years of delay it would take as a result of nationalising BT, your full fibre doesn't arrive for an extra 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you're not going to thank Jeremy Corbyn for that policy. And this involves scaring away investment, entrepreneurs, technology companies, which this country is great at the moment. Why would you want to diminish that? It means putting out of business rivals to BT Openreach like Virgin and City Fibre. So all the people who work for those companies presumably will get the sack, and Jeremy Corbyn doesn't seem to care about this. This is a really backward-looking policy that's going to waste tens of billions of pounds and delay the rollout of full fibre broadband that will hurt the British economy, hurt productivity, and hurt those people who are in rural areas and smaller towns who are waiting to get broadband.
Let's also talk about an accusation that's been made against the Conservative Party. Nigel Farage, leader of the Brexit Party, yesterday said he might well report the Conservatives to the police after accusing Downing Street of offering Brexit Party candidates jobs and peerages in return for withdrawing from the general election. So after those candidate nominations went in, deadline 4:00 yesterday, those names are going to still be on the ballot paper, but those candidates withdraw. It's too late to get another name on the ballot paper. Three Brexit Party candidates stood down from marginal seats on the day the nomination deadline passed, and there was some speculation that others might refuse to campaign who disagree with Nigel Farage's policy of standing some 300 candidates after a failure to do a sort of formal deal with your party. If it is the case that leading figures in the Conservative Party have offered Brexit Party candidates, jobs or peerages to stand down, that would be a very serious criminal matter, would it not? Has that happened?
Well, I've not seen any evidence of that whatsoever. Nigel Farage hasn't brought forward any evidence. I think this is just a distraction, frankly. Nigel Farage knows, that's the reason why he stood down 317 other candidates, that the only way to get Brexit done, to move on with the life of the country at this election, is to vote for your local Conservative candidate. It's just common sense that if you support Brexit or you want to get it done so we can move on as a country, if you split the vote by voting for the Brexit Party, you're more likely to get a government run by Jeremy Corbyn, which does not support Brexit, and 2020 would be a year mired in 2 referendums, one on Brexit, one on splitting up the union.
But again, that's a choice that the British people should make? I mean, Sir John Curtis, the leading pollster, has said that the Tories would lose more votes to the Brexit Party than Labour would lose to the Brexit Party. So Brexit Party candidates standing would reduce your chances in marginal seats. However, I mean, Nigel Farage said yesterday there are lots of peerages being offered. This is full-on Venezuelan-style corruption. Today, he said, has been an industrial-scale attempt to stop free and open politics happening in our country.
Well, Nigel Farage has claimed that he's been offered a peerage several times over the years. I don't know what the truth is of these allegations. Okay. I've not seen any credible evidence whatsoever. We're not in the business of doing pacts with any other party. We haven't done a pact. We're standing our own candidates with the Conservative Party. We're in this election to win it. And we've got a very clear message. We have a great deal. Nigel Farage has acknowledged that. That deal is ready to go. We can get Brexit done within weeks and move on with the life of the country, tackle all of these other issues that we've been talking about, the people's priorities. That can only be done if we get Brexit done first.
Just finally, the European Commission is threatening legal action against the UK government if they don't appoint a European commissioner already over deadline. They've given you a date of November the 22nd, so next week, to get a European commissioner appointed. Is Boris Johnson, your Prime Minister, is he planning to appoint a European commissioner?
No, we've got no intention of appointing a European Commissioner because we're leaving the European Union. If we have a Conservative majority government on the 13th of December, we'll get us out of the EU, get Brexit done within a matter of weeks.
Let's talk about that big Labour announcement. It's knocked a lot of other stories off the front page. Stories that would have been damaging to the Conservative Party, the A&E and waiting time figures, the NHS, but also stories that were damaging to Labour in terms of confusion ongoing about the issue of free movement and immigration. So we'll come to those in just a moment. But this promise of £20 billion to part nationalise BT and provide free internet, free broadband for every household and business in the country by 2030. How realistic is that policy? Or is the Labour Party now just sort of throwing money around because they've seen the polls and they don't expect to be a majority government, as John Curtis, the pollster, has suggested?
I think the policy is a very innovative one. I mean, we have got a huge issue in this country with digital exclusion, particularly amongst certain parts of our society, maybe tend to be more poorer people. And I think actually what this policy is a realisation that if this country is going to transform in the future to be one of the high-tech, great digital economies of the 21st century, you are going to need an element of government intervention. There are parts of the economy and society which the private sector are not reaching, so if a government can come in and provide that support, I think it's a really good policy.
But is it affordable? And we look at, so £20 billion for that. We've got massive multi-billion pound costs for nationalising the utility companies, the railways, although the railways I think would be something taken over a very long period of time as those contracts came up rather than buying them out. NHS an extra 26 billion, the Social Transformation Fund 30 billion, Green Transformation Fund 50 billion, plus the cost of the 4-day week. We've already seen that massive row about that with John Ashworth, Shadow Health Secretary, and John McDonnell about whether you'd bring the 4-day week into the NHS, boosting the need for staff by a fifth and the wage cost by a fifth. How on earth are you going to fend all of this money? I mean, there's a lot of money that does need to be spent after austerity, and money and investment does have returns, but there are tens and tens and tens of billions of pounds being pledged there. Where is that all coming from?
I think the key thing to remember in this is it's not all immediate spending. So if we get a Labour government or a Labour-led government when the election comes, this is not all going to happen on day one. This is an agenda that will take place over the course of a parliament, and indeed I believe some of those policy areas, particularly on the NHS, will take place over the course of 2 parliaments. So this will be ongoing spending over that period.
It's still a lot of money over 2 election periods, isn't it?
I accept it's a lot of money. I think what's quite interesting is both Labour and the Conservatives in this election have discovered that money tree that we were told about in previous elections, because, of course, the Conservatives are planning significant spending too. I actually think if you look at a lot of opinion polls on this issue, most polls are now showing that the country favours, not all the country, but a majority of the country, favours higher taxes on higher income earners to pay for that redistributive agenda. They also support a government that's more interventionist in the economic life of the nation. And I think this is something actually where Labour has tapped. I often come on and criticise our Brexit policy, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But I think this is an area
where Labour has actually tapped into where the country is right now.
And the polling is very clear on that, the popularity of nationalisation and the like. But again, a lot of this is, whenever we ask, front benchers, how is this going to be paid for? They say, well, we're going to get, just the top 5% of the population's earners to pay a little more tax. A little more tax is not going to go a long way for that. And then we're told they're going to tax the big tech companies to pay for more of it. Every government keeps talking about, in every country, taxing these big tech companies more. They seem to find it very hard to do when it actually comes down to it. The reality is, we realistically, we've seen this from the IFS, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, in previous elections, in 2017, when they looked at the actual, crunched the numbers on Labour Party manifesto pledges. And again, we've not seen the full manifesto yet from any of the big parties. Is actually, there's no way you could fund all of this just by taxing the very rich or taxing some tech companies. The sort of numbers we're looking at over the next 8 to 10 years are much bigger sums than that. It's going to involve other taxes going up.
Indeed. I mean, as you just said, we are, of course, yet to see the full details of the manifesto. One thing Labour have said is that after the Clause 4 meeting or Clause 5 meeting, can't remember what one it is, that's taking place this weekend, the manifesto will be published and it will be fully costed. So we will be able to examine those figures. And I think that's very, very important. I don't know if the Conservative Party are going to match that pledge to have it costed independently, but we'll have to wait and see.
Okay.
I think one thing we have to remember is there will probably be an element of borrowing. I assume
Probably?
the case. Well, well, certainly. But I would simply point out that the current government have borrowed more than any previous government in this country.
But look, and again, it's not a party political point, but we know that in the post, when they came in 2010, in the post crash years, whichever government had been in power would have been borrowing far more than any other government. That wasn't a party political issue. That was after the rescue of the banks, wasn't it? Let's turn our attention, though, to other issues like Brexit, immigration policy. We're told this weekend Labour senior bigwigs are going to, the NEC are all going to be meeting to thrash out what is going to be in the Labour manifesto. We've had different senior members of the front bench talking about immigration policy, where we and senior trade unionists like Len McCluskey, the paymaster of one of the biggest trade unions and bankrollers of the Labour Party, giving very different views on whether or not we will have free movement under a Brexit vote under the Labour Party if we did have that second referendum and their version of leave. Would we have free movement or not? Do you know what Labour's immigration policy is today?
Not yet, no. I mean, as I say, we'll wait to see it at the weekend. All we can go on is what our last manifesto said and what subsequent conferences have determined. Of course, in 2017, there was an explicit line in our manifesto that said freedom of movement will end. And there's been a debate in the party about what our immigration policy is going to look like.
And the vote at party conference a couple of months ago was that the freedom of movement should continue.
Yes, that was passed by the conference. But I think it didn't specify exactly how it's going to work, what range it should include. Should it just include Europe? Should it go beyond? So I think the conference sets the broad policy, and then it's up to Labour figures and the leaders of the party to say exactly how that's going to work. So I think Labour need to go into this election with a very clear line on immigration, and I would urge the meeting taking place this weekend to examine public opinion on this. And while we do need to have that debate around how many migrants we need to come in, one thing I do think Jeremy's right on is to set an arbitrary figure, which the Conservatives have done in the past, which they've never met, seems to be not very sensible, because you're always going to set yourself up to fail. I think a sensible debate needs to happen about the type of workers we need and what sectors of the economy requires that support.
Yeah, but again, that's a sensible debate about how it works, but freedom of movement doesn't decide that. Just finally, the number of papers have got stories on their front pages, including The Guardian, Daily Mail and others, about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. The Daily Mail condemned by his own candidates. This is words spoken or written online by some of the Labour MP hopefuls about what they really think about Jeremy Corbyn, not fit to be leader or prime minister. He should resign for good of the country. A disaster. It's time to put country ahead of blind support for Corbyn. I feel betrayed by Corbyn. He must resign. He's allowed anti-Semites to feel safe. These are comments from official Labour Party candidates at this next election. We've also got a bunch of, for want of a better phrase, lovies who have written a letter saying they can't support the Labour Party because of anti-Semitism. And yet he is still the party leader. And many in the Labour ranks who have been very critical of him over the issues of anti-Semitism are now closing ranks and supporting him for Prime Minister. Do you think that Jeremy Corbyn is fit for public office?
Well, Jeremy Corbyn is the elected leader of the Labour Party. He has won 2 leadership elections within the party, and he's our candidate for Prime Minister.
But with all due respect, I'm not sure you answered my question.
I think there have been serious issues within the Labour Party over anti-Semitism. One thing I think is fair to say is the party has responded in dealing with these cases. It has been a slow response. To be critical here, it has been a slow response. We needed much more robust procedures. It is extremely regrettable that we are now at a position where we are going into a general election and the public perception of the Labour Party on this issue is not resolved and has not been healed.
Time is against us. With all due respect, Brendan Chilton, you're General Secretary of Labour Leave. You've been involved in Labour for a long time. I'm asked you a simple question. Is Jeremy Corbyn fit for public office?
I think Jeremy Corbyn is fit to be Prime Minister, yes.
All right. There have been some accusations of dirty tricks being made by Nigel Farage. Now, yesterday, he decided to put forward candidates in all but 317 seats, which were won by the Tory party in 2017, after failing to do a deal with the Conservatives to stand down candidates in seats where the Tories might do better, and for the Tories to reciprocate in seats where they think the Brexit party might do better. But yesterday, after those nomination deadlines passed at 4 p.m, 3 Brexit Party candidates stood down from marginal seats. They included Rupert Lowe, who said he decided not to contest the seat he had originally been standing in because it was such a marginal seat. He said it was highly conceivable his candidacy would allow Corbyn's Momentum candidate to win. This prompted Nigel Farage last night to threaten to report the Conservatives to the police. He's accused Downing Street of offering jobs and peerages to a number of Brexit Party candidates in return for them withdrawing from the general election after nominations had come through. Well, let's talk about all of this with the Brexit Party MEP, Anne Widdecombe. Good morning to you, Anne.
Good morning to you.
Are you aware yourself of any of these allegations, of any phone calls being made to you or the people you know offering them this, or is this all pie in the sky from Nigel Farage?
No, it's certainly not pie in the sky. I mean, I was myself on the very day that, had they known it, I was actually putting my nomination in. I was rung twice by somebody, and no, you won't get the name from me, somebody in number 10. First of all, saying that it would be all my fault if we lost Plymouth Devonport. Well, that was okay. Then rang me back to say that if I did stand down, I would play a role in the negotiations. That was the phrase. Nothing more explicit than that. And I said, look, I've played no role in the Tory party for donkey's years. You're not going to flatter me and butter me up now and tell me that I'm going to have some role. But that apparently, I can only talk for what I know about in my own experience, but that sort of thing apparently has been going on.
Now, of course, if it has been going on, your party leader, Nigel Farage, has said the Tories would be guilty of corruption of the worst level. He said this is likened it to living in Venezuela. Now, number 10 have categorically denied that any offers or inducements have been offered.
Well, I can only tell you what happened to me. That's all I can say. And I can put my hand on the good book and say that. That is what happened to me. That's all I can say. I can also add this. No serious candidate is going to be deflected by that sort of activity. It was a huge waste of time for the Tories, apart from anything else, just a big waste of time.
Now, I mean, there has been quite a lot of dispute inside and outside the party about whether or not it would be the right thing for the Brexit party to stand down more candidates. Many polls would perhaps been welcoming if the Tory party had stood down some candidates in some of the 40 particular most likely target seats of the Brexit party instead of just fielding, say, paper candidates, as has been suggested. The polling, though, Sir John Curtis, the leading pollster in this country, has said that your party leader is wrong to say that actually, look, you're going to be drawing votes from the Labour Party in a lot of these seats rather than the Tory party. You're doing more damage to the Labour Party, to Jeremy Corbyn, than you will to the Tory party. He says that is absolute nonsense. And he said, on the contrary, he said the Tories are going to lose more votes to the Brexit party than Labour, and that will reduce the Conservatives' chances in marginal seats. Are you concerned as a Leaver that you could actually cost the Leave vote?
Right. Let's distinguish what we're talking about. There are marginal seats where Labour is in and where the Conservatives possibly could win. And we offered very clearly to stand down in those seats if in return the Conservative Party would stand down in no more than about 30 key seats in the north and in Wales, where they haven't returned a Conservative for 100 years. So don't tell me we'd be damaging the Conservatives, but where we would have some chance against Labour. That was what we offered. Boris flatly turned that down. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if that results in him losing seats, he is the one who has robbed his candidates, not us.
And in terms of what we wake up to on Friday in 4 weeks' time, the 13th of December, if we do wake up to a hung parliament yet again, we're back where we started from, and perhaps not enough Leave voting MPs supported to push through any version of Brexit, Boris Johnson's version, your version, free trade deal, no deal, whatever it is. Will you apologise to Leave voters?
I think Boris should apologise to Leave voters because, as I say, we offered a very, very straightforward deal, very straight. We'd already stood down in 317 seats, and for weeks before that, we had been offering him that we would also stand down in all the marginals. He could have a free run in all the marginals in return for just about 30 seats in very heavy Leave areas where there is a Remainer Labour MP. It was an extremely good bargain. He was too proud to take it, so therefore he must also accept the consequences.
Let's talk about some of the policies of the other parties. We're not seeing many policies, by the way, from the Brexit Party other than Brexit at the current time.
That is not true. That is not true, Julia, and you know it's not true. We announced very early on, before any of the other parties who promptly followed suit, that we would be spending $200 billion in the regions, and we costed that out and said how we were going to do it. We've announced the abolition of inheritance tax. We've announced the reform of business rates. We have announced a great deal. So please don't say you haven't been hearing from us.
I would say we haven't been hearing many announcements, I think is what I said. We'll be hearing a lot more detail from the Conservatives, from the Labour Party, Lib Dems and others about what they're going to do. How detailed is your manifesto going to be? Nigel Farage has said it's not going to be called a manifesto because people don't trust manifestos. But whatever you call it, how detailed is it going to be? Do you have a full programme for government?
We have said very clearly that we will shortly be publishing policies that will cover all major areas of our national life. That is what we have said, and that is what we will do.
And in terms of some of the announcements we've seen from other parties, Labour Party very much in the news today for their promise of free broadband for every household and every business in the country by 2030 by part nationalisation of BT's Openreach. That comes along with nationalisation of utilities, railways and others. What do you make of that policy? Because in a lot of the seats you're going to be up against Labour Remain candidates. Those are going to be the crucial seats you're going to be hoping to win. Yes. Promises of free stuff go down very well with voters of all political persuasion.
I think most intelligent voters know that when a general election comes, everybody promises everything. And Jeremy Corbyn in particular, I mean, first of all, he's got to pay to renationalise. He's got to buy all the private companies. When he's done that, and he's then going to supply everything free, that's another cost. You do have to wonder how on earth Corbyn is even going to begin to pay for all the things that he's promising.
Again, that is certainly going to be an issue there. However, again, you're talking about £200 billion for the regions,
which we costed.
You costed. And everyone seems to be costing this. Do you think, though, that we have just had, again, partly because of what's happened since the 2016 Brexit referendum, such a breakdown in trust from voters across many different political persuasions, but particularly among those who voted Leave, that whatever promises any political party makes these days, they just simply aren't believed anymore?
Oh, well, I think that is not a particularly new phenomenon. I think what is new is there has been a complete breakdown of trust in political institutions since 2016, in Parliament in particular. People voted, and 3.5 years later, what they voted for hasn't been delivered, has been frustrated by Parliament, by democratically elected MPs. So I think there is a huge issue of trust. And that is one of the things we will be focusing on in the Brexit Party because, of course, our motto is change politics for good.
Anne Widdecombe, Brexit Party MEP, as you'll have heard, she also mentioned that she's standing as a candidate herself in this general election. That's in the constituency of Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport. The other candidates standing in that seat are James Elwood for the Green Party, Luke Pollard for the Labour Party, Graham Reid for the Liberal Democrats and Rebecca Smith for the Conservatives, alongside Anne Widdecombe for the Brexit Party.